Welcome to the Gospel Addict Podcast. I'm Bryan.
And I'm Jim Reske.
We're gospel addicts because we believe the gospel of Jesus isn't just good news, it's the best news ever.
We're addicted to the gospel because it doesn't just start us out in the Christian life, it is the Christian life.
Join us as we look at the Bible through the lens of the gospel.
Thanks so much for listening.
This, to me, is a story about divine appointments and a glimpse of heaven. And I'll get to the glimpse of heaven maybe at the end as we wrap it up. Divine appointments. So, God uses divine appointments in our lives. I'm going to start with kind of the present day, but this is going to go all the way back to 1978, a divine appointment that occurred there. First of all, let me just welcome Walt McCord and Keith Hughes. The three of us are on this podcast together. So you're going to get to hear how Walt and Keith's lives kind of intersected, and then and how they lost touch for many, many years, and they've been reunited. So welcome guys. I'm really excited about this time. So let me just start with this. The divine appointment that occurred that allowed me to meet with you, Walt, is, and you don't even know some of these details. The only reason I met you is because I went on a spontaneous trip to Florida with one of my college friends who I found out was going to Florida for spring break by himself. And it just turned out that in my work schedule that I could do some things remotely. And so I spontaneously went on this trip to Florida with him. Well, when we went to the airport, I ended up in a shuttle, airport shuttle, with a guy named Mike Klein, who goes to your church. And Mike Klein, I actually kind of recognized him, but it was one of those things where I wasn't sure where I knew him from. And he looked at me and he goes, "Oh, you're Bryan, right, with the Navs?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, I'm Aaron Klein's father." Well, Aaron Klein was in the college ministry that I led at Penn State many, many years ago. And as soon as he said that, I knew who he was, and I'd met him on several occasions. Well, then we just kind of caught up with each other, and I found out he was involved at the church that you work at, Walt, and then I found out he led an adult Bible class at that church. Later on, I got the idea to reach out to Mike, and when he mentioned he was leading a Sunday school class or an adult Bible fellowship, I thought, well, I'm going to reach out to Mike and see if I can come and just speak to the class and tell him a little bit about the trip. So I did that, and then Mike remembered like all that he'd learned about you, Walt, and how you love to travel the world, how you've been to Israel and you've done lots of tours. And so he encouraged me to set up a meeting with you. Now, if you just think about all the different circumstances I just mentioned, how one of those things didn't happen and we would never be on this call right now. And even the fact he mentioned you to me, Walt, I mean, I could have easily been like, I don't really know, Walt, but I arranged a meeting. I set up a meeting to meet with you, and I thank you for responding to that meeting. So on April 22nd, I went down to your office, and this is where it starts to get interesting. So I'm going down there just because you and I share a passion to take people to the lands of the Bible. And that's kind of a recent passion of mine in the last 5 years. I love it. So anyway, we're meeting, and this is the whole extent of our meeting, Walt, is that we're going to talk about this, all the trips we've led and encourage one another. And then you notice that I'm wearing a Navigator shirt. You saw the Navigator logo on my shirt. And why don't you pick it up from there and tell me what you just kind of on an offhanded comment mentioned something about how you were impacted by the Navigators.
Yeah, so actually, I think our meeting's kind of coming to an end, and kind of I think you're getting ready to get up, and I just said, I have a really soft spot in my heart for the Navigators, because it was the Navigator guy that led me to Christ at Penn State back in 1978. And you're like, really? Who was the guy? And I just said, well, his name was Keith Hughes. And I said, actually, I wrote his name in my Bible, and he met with me a few times, and then he was leaving State College, where Penn State's at. He was leaving there and going somewhere else, and kind of handed my name off to somebody else, and I've never been able to track him down. And kind of almost just started to laughingly say, maybe he was an angel, maybe it wasn't a guy. I don't know, but we've tried to find this guy for years. And then, of course, out of the blue, you said, "Hey, I might know a guy," and I don't know who
Yeah.
that other guy is.
Yeah. So then I said, well, what's his name? And you said Keith Hughes. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try to find this guy. And actually, on it, to be quite honest with you, I was driving home from our appointment. I was thinking, I'm never going to be able to find this guy. 1978. I mean, I joined the Navigators in the 90s, late 90s, and the guy that I knew was at Penn State in the 90s. But I decided, you know what? I'm going to reach out. I'm going to see what I can find out. So I reached out to the guy who led the ministry at Penn State in the 90s, and I was trying to figure out who was the leader of the ministry in the late 70s in 1978. And you mentioned to me that Keith was not a staff person, that he was just a guy who worked at the Dairy Queen downtown State College, but he was actively involved in the Navigators. And that's another step. Like, boy, that. I mean, even the staff person might not remember Keith. So, long story short, I find out that Keith is actually a good friend of a colleague of mine, Bob Seibert. And so, Keith, why don't you talk about how you know Bob, and then I really want us to go back to this the story of Walt, and like when you hear where Walt was the night that he met Keith, it is a divine appointment. I mean, because Walt was not in a good place, and
No.
so we're going to get to that. But Keith, why don't you join in? And so I found out you were a mutual friend of Bob Seibert's. I'm like, this has to be the guy. So, how did you meet Bob Seibert?
Well, Bob and I were together at Penn State in the 70s. Bob is a few years older than me, so he arrived there before I did. Uh, I got to Penn State in 72. He was already there. I actually came to Christ through another Nav guy that lived on my dorm floor, uh, February of 73. I remember it well. And so so I met Bob. I met Bob that way. Bob eventually, he graduated Penn State, and he moved on and went down to serve with the Navs in the Virginia area, Norfolk specifically. Then he moved to Richmond, and he worked. He was in the military ministry, but then he went on to serve in another capacity within the Nav organization. But Bob and I are kind of stayed in touch over the years. But back in probably 2017, we reconnected through his love of the sport of collegiate wrestling. Little did I know up until that point that Bob was avidly following collegiate wrestling, and particularly Penn State's team, because they have a great wrestling squad. And Bob reached out to a bunch of us and said, "Hey, the NCAA tournament's going to be in Cleveland this year. I've been going to some of these things. Would any of you like to go?" And I had wrestled in junior high, and loved the sport. I thought, but I hadn't necessarily followed it for years, and I said, "Yeah, I'm up for going to that." And so we went to that one. The next year, it was the tournament was in Pittsburgh. Last year, I believe there was a Big Ten wrestling tournament down in Maryland. We went to that. So we reconnected through our mutual enjoyment of this collegiate wrestling. And we actually we were just with Bob and his wife Liza, because we just got back a few weeks ago from a trip down south, and on our way back, we stopped in the Richmond, Virginia area and visited with the Cybers for a few days and just had a wonderful time with them. But out of the blue, I get this. First of all, I get this post on Facebook. I think it's on Facebook. A friend request from you. I think both of you. And I'm thinking, who in the heck? Because you get a lot of those things. People's accounts in Facebook get spammed. Get hacked
Right.
all the time, and then you're getting these bogus friend requests. I'm thinking, oh, this is another one of, somebody's, somebody, and I just kind of dismissed it. Then all of a sudden, a text message from Bob shows up, and he mentions the conversation or the exchange of messages, however you talked with him, Greg, and that somebody was looking for me. I think he mentioned. Oh no, I don't think he mentioned your name, Walt. But he said he gave you my cell phone number. And next thing I know, and I called Bob right away and said, "What's up? What's going on here? Who are you giving my cell phone number out to, for crying
Yeah,
out loud?"
right,
Right.
Yeah,
right.
that's a very private number, Bob. What are you doing?
Right.
And then he explains what is going on. I say, well, I said, I let's see where this goes, because I don't have a strong recollection of all this stuff. That it was an interesting time in my life when this all went down, and so you know, and we can maybe get into that, part of this
Yeah.
conversation. But anyways, so next thing I know, I get a text from Walt, and Walt asked a question, and then what sealed the deal was he said, did you work at Dairy Queen? And it's like, holy crap, this must be for real. This guy knows, and he sent me a picture of this Bible with Revelation 3:20, which is the verse I always used, because that's the verse that sealed the deal for me and prompted me to, accept Christ. Bring it, ask him into my heart, and that's always the verse I would use, to explain that to people, and I still do, but. So Walt had written my name next to Revelation 3:20, and he sent me a picture of the thing. I'm thinking, what in the world is a guy got my name next to Revelation 3:20? And then he said the Dairy Queen. It's like, oh my goodness, there's something. So I asked Walt to call me. He called me, and I said, you're gonna need to fill me in here, because I'm vague on all this stuff, and I'm sure we'll
Yeah.
get into that. But that's how it all came down. That's how I got reconnected or connected with Walt
Yeah.
and you.
Well,
Yes.
and
Well,
can I just make a quick comment? It was a surreal conversation because this is the most important day in my life, and
Mm-hmm.
has changed the trajectory of my life forever.
Mm-hmm.
And Keith doesn't even remember it. I mean, that and as he was saying, he said, "Yeah, I share with a lot of people," and which is so exciting that he just was sharing with people and doesn't even remember. Doesn't on first contact remember anything about me, and yet, man, I remember him, and I mean, it was truly life changing. It changed my life. It changed the life of my mom, who I got to lead to Christ. It changed the life of my marriage, my family, my kids, my grandkids. I mean, and so just having that there and thinking, man, I'd love to connect with this guy, but I have no idea how I would ever even find him, and for that to walk out of the blue with you, Greg, I mean, it really was one of those divine appointments.
yeah, and I was amazed that I was able to track Keith
Facilitate
down.
that.
And
Yeah.
it's so cool what you just shared, Walt. And I want to get to your story, because I want people to hear where you were at that night that Keith met you. And yeah, Keith, you had this lifestyle, you developed a lifestyle in college. The Navigators kind of helped you, where you were
Well,
just an active witness for Christ. You were, intentionally telling people, um, and that's wonderful. And it makes me think about, like, how, God has prepared good works for us to work in, and how we're not even aware of the good works that we're doing. And I think that's the way it's meant to be.
mhm.
We shouldn't be doing good works to try to get God's favor. We do them, out of gratitude for what he's done for us. Um, so, Walt, tell us, let's go back to that night in 1978. What was going on? Where were you at?
Yeah, so I'll track back just a little bit farther. So when I was 11, my dad, who was a very strong leader, but not necessarily a very overt follower of Christ, My dad got ill with cancer, and then shortly, 13 days after my 13th birthday, my dad died. And taking his leadership out of our home, he'd been a World War II vet. He was a full bird colonel. He fought in North Africa all the way into Germany in World War II. But him leaving our family left a real void there. And then from 13 to 18, 17, basically, I just got more and more out of control. My mom struggled to maintain kind of leadership in our family, and I was getting in trouble. My senior year, I got kicked out of school twice. In a Going down to our senior graduation party, we went down to Washington D.C. and did something dumb, and I actually got taken to a holding cell in the bottom of the Capitol building. And they said, yeah, you're not going to graduate with your class. And then my class said, yeah, he is, or we're all going to not go to graduation. And I was just a mess. And so I went off to college to party my life away. And the day I went off to college, my mom had a locksmith come in and change the locks in our house and said, I don't ever want you coming back here, which made perfect sense. I mean, I was just out of control. And so I go down to State College. I'm going to party my life away. I'm there for the summer session because I had to do that way because my grades were not as good as they could have been. And anyway, the night before I met Keith, the night before I did what I usually did. I got drunk, and for the first time since my dad died, I cried. And one of my friends was there who was from back home, and he's like, "Well, I've never seen you cry." And I'm like, so I told this guy, Mark. I said, Mark, I have absolutely nothing to live for, but I'm scared to die. And so the next night, went over to the intramural building, playing basketball, got in a fight with a guy, broke his nose, almost killed him. Long story. I come back to my apartment, my dorm room, 14 McKean Hall, and I'm like, okay, God, or whoever you are, Allah, Buddha, whoever you are, you show me how I can be right with you. You show me how I can deal with this anger, and I'll give you my life, and I'll go anywhere you want me to go, and I'll do anything you want me to do. But I'm in trouble. I need help, And so I sat down on my bunk, sitting there, and I'm like, okay, now what's going to happen? And about 10 minutes went by, and I opened the curtains, and I'm looking out, Beaver Stadium, and I said, God, I'm not asking you to do a miracle or write it in the sky, but you show me clearly how I can know, how I can be right with you, and take care of this anger, and be different, because I'm just in a terrible place. And all of my words weren't probably fit for a good testimony, but anyway, I'm just sitting there, and with that, there's a knock at my door, and I'm like, okay, what is going to happen now? By the way, that's my dog barking in the background. Sorry about that,
That's okay.
but
I got my dog in my background too. So,
well, when she hears the knock at the door, we've trained her to bark. But
oh yeah,
anyway, I open the door, and there's this guy standing there. Snick, come here. All right, so this is my good dog, best dog ever. Sorry about that. Snickers, come here. She's a chocolate lab, and her name is Snickers. Sorry about that, but she's now thinking she's saving my life. But
right.
I opened the door, and there's this guy standing there, and he's got a little clipboard. Keith, can you imagine this? You have a clipboard with a piece of paper on it, and you said, "Hey, my name's Keith Hughes. I'm involved with a student Christian organization called the Navigators, and I'd love to do a spiritual interest survey with you." And if I remember correctly, I don't even, it had a number of questions, and the last one was the diagnostic. If you were to die tonight and stand before God, and He were to say, "Why should I let you into heaven?" What would you say? And I just said, Keith, forget the survey, cut to the chase. Tell me why God just sent you here to tell me how I can be right with Him. And Keith was kind of freaked out because I've broken this guy's nose, and I have blood, and I'm sweaty, and I've got his blood on me. And, you know, uh, my my dorm room is a mess. I'm going down. My brother owns a nightclub in Hagerstown, Maryland, and I'm going down there and buying booze and bringing it back and selling it to underage kids. And I mean, I'm just a mess. And Keith just said, "Okay, here we go," and he just shared the gospel with me.
That is so cool. And you remember some things that Keith didn't remember as far as why Keith was at your dorm that night. What do you remember Keith telling you? because I think this is part of the divine appointment, because Keith
Yeah.
normally would not talk to, he was normally not in your dorm, from what I understand.
No. So and again, Keith, jump right in. I mean, so my understanding is he was going to go see a baseball game or a softball game over on the IM fields, and a freak rainstorm came through and rained out the game. And I don't know if it was a guy in his Bible study. Keith, you want to speak in, or I mean, all I know is that you were up there in East Halls, over on the IM fields, and then ended up coming to that little park there, just by our dorm. I don't even remember if you know that there was there were a few picnic tables, and my understanding is you said, I'm just going to spend some time with the Lord, and then God impressed upon you, hey, there's someone you need to go talk to. And that's the story as I remember it. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay. All right. Um, I'm relying on what you're sharing, Walt, because I know the big picture of what was going on, what was in my life in those days. East Halls, where you lived, was an area where I started to grow in Christ, because when after I accepted the Lord, I got involved in a Bible study with some Nav guys up there, and one of them in particular, excuse me, he and I became close, and I cut my teeth in terms of learning how to do evangelism in those dorms, basically going door to door. I didn't use that survey very often, as a matter of fact, but I do remember using it at times. But the, uh, the gentleman that I was good friends with, he and I often we just had a heart to do evangelism, and we would um, first we would walk around that dorm complex, and we would just pray over it. And we would just ask God, to, bring people to him, and, take us to people. But that night I was solo. I mean, this friend of mine, he's a couple years older than I am. And so he has graduated and moved into the working world. And I'm still up there at Penn State. I'm working, but I had stayed at Penn State to continue being involved in the Navigators after I graduated. And I know that summer I would go up there solo. I mean, I can remember going up there solo, just by myself. That's all I can remember. I don't remember, I don't, the details that you remember, Walt. I can't
Yeah,
bring them.
Walt, was it May? Wasn't it like May 21st or something like that?
No, it was July 13th.
It was the
Um,
summertime.
it was summertime, and it was, again, and like I said, I have it written down right here in my Bible, 7/13/78. And I asked Keith later, I said, how did God get you here? And he just said, well, I'm down here, I'm praying, I'm just having time with the Lord. And the Lord impressed on my spirit, there was someone I need to go talk to. So he said, I got into McKean Hall, and I got on the elevator, closed my eyes, and pressed the button. It was 4. And he went to 401, and no one was there. He came to 402, and there was waiting for him. And I mean, again, when you talk about divine appointments, I mean, that, not only I was not only waiting for him, I was not, I was ready to hear, and I was ready to act. And God had put a number of other people, including a Christian businessman back in my small hometown by the name of Fred. He put a number of people in my life that were sharing the gospel with me, but it just, I just kept resisting and resisting. And that night when I prayed, and when God sent Keith to the door, I'm like, okay, this is it. It's time. It's time, God's done his part. It's time for me now to bend my knee and come to the Lord. And that's what I did. And then over the next couple of weeks, Keith came. You probably don't remember this, but you brought a little, I want to say it was blue, like a Gideon New Testament with Psalms. And I don't know where
Okay.
you got it. I don't know how, but you brought that and started telling me, okay, you need to do this. You need to read the Gospel of John. All right, I'm going to read the Gospel of John. And yeah, it was just one of those things. Like I said, but would you have remembered? Did you have access to those Gideon Bibles? I don't know.
I don't recall. I apologize. Not. I mean, I had Bible access to Bibles. Now, the guy that was influential in my coming to Christ was involved with the Gideon, so I may have had some of those from him. I do not know.
Yeah,
It
I
sounds like
wish.
it was a perfect follow-up Bible to give to somebody,
Oh yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So
and I just tore that thing up. I mean, I couldn't read it enough. And that was my Bible for the next year. And then a year later, my Bible study group in May, a year later, gave me this Bible that I still have today. My wife has had it rebound, and that's the Bible that I wrote in. Keith. I put it in that little Gideon Bible, but I transferred, notation of, here it is, Keith Hughes,
yeah.
Navigators, 11/13/78.
Yeah, so one important thing just to clarify is you guys didn't know each other. You were
Oh
total
no,
strangers. You were
total
total
strangers.
strangers. He literally knocked on your door randomly, and it was a divine encounter. You were at the
Well,
end of your rope. You were begging God to reveal
oh,
himself
I,
to
I
you.
was I was headed towards death or prison. That's
And
where I
Keith
was headed.
Keith had no idea. He had
None.
no idea who was behind the door. He didn't
Nope.
he didn't know anything about you. He didn't know anything that you were that ready to receive the good news of Christ. It's so cool on so many different levels, this story. Now, Walt, just give people an idea, like the tr- what God has done in your life in the last 40, 50 years since then. Like, because I bet you
Yeah.
you had no idea where God was going to take you at that
Oh,
point.
none, none. Just a couple of. Keith handed my name off to somebody in the Navigators, and somehow I got lost in the midst of the summer to fall, whatever. And I think Keith really knew what a mess I was, and said, "Hey, we don't want this guy. This guy, let's give him to somebody else." And I don't know. I don't know. Keith, what
No,
do you
you're
think?
you're you're actually the kind of guy I like the most. You just were. You're that type of guy. So I doubt it was that
Yeah.
reason.
Well,
Well,
you know what? Like in my 20 years of campus ministry is it's messy.
yeah.
And so sometimes things don't, you try to pass on people to somebody you're discipling to a disciple, and it just doesn't work out, or yeah, things happen. So
Yeah.
anyway, at that point,
Hey,
you
I've got to
totally,
tell you, this is really important. But after I trusted Christ, Keith said, "Hey, somebody's been living Christ in front of you. Who is it?" And I said, "Well, there's this businessman back home. His name's Fred, and what you just shared is what he's been sharing with me. It's consistent, and yeah." And Keith, again, does this sound like you? All right, but anyway, you just said, "Hey, you need to call him and tell him what you did tonight."
Hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, I got to call this guy and tell him what I did. I mean, can you imagine that? You tell him anyway. So I call this guy. I'm calling collect. You remember the long distance calls and
Hmm.
calling
yes.
collect, and so anyway, I call and and they say, Walt McCord calling for Fred Haynes, and he picks up the phone, and I said, I said, Fred, I just want to call you. Tonight, a guy came and shared with me how I could be right with God through Jesus Christ. And I prayed to receive him. And I just wanted to call you and let you know and thank you for all the time you shared with me. And anyway, that when I would continue to go back home, because my mom had basically kind of kicked me out of the home, I would stay there, with him and his family, and just started to grow. Navigators lost me, or I lost them, or whatever. I ended up getting involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, and crew at Penn State was pretty strong at that time. And but again, kind of an anchor back home was this guy Fred, and yeah, what's amazing now, fast forward 4 years later, I ended up going and doing a ministry trip with a couple of other people, and ended up falling in love with this gal on this ministry trip. We took 16 teenagers from New Jersey to Florida. And by the end of that trip, I said, I'm going to marry this gal. But I had one main problem, because this gal and her family knew what a dirty dog I'd been in high school. They knew me from high school. She's from the same small town. And anyway, when it came time to ask her dad, I knew that he knew, what a mess I'd been and what a just
Hmm.
a bad dog I'd been. And so anyway, I asked him, the guy I asked for his only daughter's hand in marriage was Fred. And Fred never knew that he was leading to Christ, a guy 4 years later that would ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. And now we're 43 years into a marriage. And yeah, it's been, it was kind of this wild and crazy path of him, leading me to Christ, of me growing in Christ, of me marrying his daughter, and then, again, having his first grandson, and putting,
Wow.
my son in his lap and saying, you know, you know, what a blessing when your children's children rise up and call the name of the Lord blessed.
Mm.
And that those first, our boys are walking with the Lord. Not boys, what am I talking about? They're 42 and 41 and 38, but involved in ministry, serving the Lord well, loving their families well. And yeah, I mean, they've heard this story a number of times, and yet all of them are like just so amazed. It's like, wait a minute. So Keith Hughes, we've heard his name now for 43 years. You, how did God get him back? How, I mean, Keith, our sons are just like shocked. It's like, wait, there really was a guy named Keith Hughes, and he really did do this, and you've now reconnected with him, and it's like, yeah, and he barely even remembers me. That's how significant I am.
Yeah. Hey, let's pause there for a second. And Keith, why don't you respond to that? What's this like? What's this like hearing this? The
Oh, I still haven't wrapped my head around it. It, but I got to say, it reminds me it reminds me of a couple of things. And if I may, I just like to read something in a couple passages of scripture real quick, if I
Sure,
can do so. So so
sure.
in so in First Corinthians chapter 3, beginning in verse 4, uh, for when one says, "I am Paul," and another, "I am of Apollos," are you not mere men? What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you believed, even as the Lord gave opportunity to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but
Mm,
was causing the growth. So then neither the one who plants nor the one who waters is anything, but God who causes the growth. And this is just, that is this whole story of what we're laying out here, what's being shared here, just focuses, points directly at that. All I did, I had the opportunity to plant, but so many other people have watered into your life, and you become who you've become, so it's just, it just this is just a neat testimony of that the truth of God as he described it here in Corinthians. Then I think we're all familiar with the parable of the sower. The one,
mm,
Yes.
yes. So I won't go into the specifics on that, but the deal is we got to sow God's word, and God, and just put it out there, and let's and see what kind of ground it falls on. In this instance, I mean, when you mentioned that gentleman, Walt, that what was his name, Fred, right?
right, Fred.
Yeah, I mean, I had a similar guy in my life who, was who basically he was my former German teacher in high school, and the Gideon guy, and so he, I professed Christ to him when I was a senior in high school, and then when I when I graduated from high school, the teacher-student barrier was no longer needed to be up, and he and I became good friends. And we went on a trip my freshman year in college before I met this Nav guy in February who led me to the Lord. And on our way back from this trip, he was talking about spiritual things with me, and he immediately concluded that 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 was a smokescreen. That my professing Christ, to him earlier was a smokescreen. It was just, I really didn't have Christ in my life. So man, that guy went back to his people at church and just started to pray for me, and he prayed me into the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
And then he like when Fred was to you, I guess when you went back home, this guy was to me. He was the guy that because I didn't have any Christian friends. I didn't form any Christian friends in high school. So when I would come back from college, I would seek him out, and he and I just had precious times together. But anyway, so he's the one that prayed me into the kingdom, and very influential. Just like Fred was for you.
Yeah. And Keith, it's interesting to me because I've thought about this quite a bit, and I thought about how God got you to my door. And what if you had not been obedient and yielded? What would God have done? I don't know. But I'm sorry, it just
Well,
it just stirs my heart to say I am so thankful that you were obedient and you were yielded and the Spirit moved you and brought you to my door at just the right moment. And again, God could have done it some other way. I don't know. Um, Jesus said, if these people keep quiet, the rocks will cry out. Maybe he would have had the rocks cry out. I don't know. But but I'm forever grateful, and all these years later, just so thankful. And I'll just fast forward a little bit. So I was an agriculture education major. I ended up teaching a couple years at Shippensburg High School in South um, Pennsylvania. And then our pastor challenged me. He said, well, you need some Bible training. And so I went and got a second BS at Philadelphia College of Bible. And it's there where I was just really led by some amazing professors. And they challenged me to get some more schooling. And I started working at Calvary Baptist Church in Bristol, Pennsylvania. And they said, we're going to encourage you to start taking classes from Dallas Theological Seminary. They have an extension campus here at Philadelphia College of Bible. And the next thing you know, I'm down at Dallas Theological Seminary, and I finished an MABS and then a THM and then a PhD in Old Testament. And yeah, I mean, it's just been this crazy route. I was just telling Greg, we've just been in Malaysia and Indonesia teaching young next generation Christian leaders, business leaders on bringing their faith into the workplace in a Muslim majority country. And, all of that. And I told you this, Keith, you have a piece of that,
Yeah.
God, um, you have a piece of our son's ministries. Um, without that, I shudder to think what my life would have been. And, God brought you at just the right moment in just the right time. And my life was forever changed. And man, I have not forgotten a moment of that. I've written it down. I have my testimony written down in a number of different settings. And and multiple people said, wait, you still don't know who this guy is and where he came from and where he went? And I'm like, no, I got nothing. I have no idea who this guy is.
Well,
wow.
what's so cool about this is, you've gone on, Walt, and you've touched thousands upon thousands of lives for the gospel. And Keith had no idea that this broken, at the end of his rope, angry young man that he led to faith that night and he spent some time with, he had no idea what happened with you. And I'm glad Keith, you brought up, like, Mark chapter 4, the parable of the seed, because it says others, like seeds sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop 30, 60, and 100 times what was sown. And this is what's so cool to me is that, and this is why I call this a glimpse of heaven, because it's very possible that you guys would not have met until you stepped into eternity. And you would have been able to hear Walt say some of the things he's saying to you right now.
Right.
And he would be saying, you touched my life, you changed my life. And because of that, I was able to go on and touch other people's lives with the gospel. And the seed you sown in my life is producing fruit. And to me, that's one of the most exciting things about ministry. That's one of the reasons why I want to put this on a podcast and share it with people, because I think I'm in the ministry because when God does something like this, and I love, Keith, that you're like, you also brought up that passage, it's not about us. It's all God. This was a divine appointment. You did not, it's not like you're taking credit. Like I was the one who converted Walt to faith. You were just, willing to give up your night. And then when you think about some of the circumstances, if it's true that, you were going to a baseball game that night, and what if the weather was nice? You might never have met Walt, but there was a storm and that changed your plans. I mean, to me, as I think about ministry and as I think about, when I've seen God work, it's divine appointments like these. It's these things you can't like orchestrate.
Yeah, right.
And it's just so encouraging, isn't it? I think the three of us are just so encouraged by what God is doing and the grace of God, the goodness of God. And so, yeah. So Keith, any other thoughts you want to share about this?
No, but I want to emphasize that, my part in this was just so minor, and um, the focus we need to have in all this is, we need to focus on obedience.
Yeah.
And, as long as we obey, God is going to, do something with that. You know,
Well, and that's convicting because you made a habit of sharing your faith. You made a habit of like, hey, I'm not going to do what other college, I'm not going to go play ping pong or go play pool with my friends. I want to go knock on doors. I want to go talk to people. You made that a habit. I want to ask you this, Keith. What has your life been like the last 40 years?
well, that summer, that was actually a little bit of a crazy summer for me, that of this encounter, because I started to date a gal who would end up becoming my wife. So we end up dating that summer and into the fall, and got engaged by Christmas time, and were married the following April. But then God actually, he laid on our hearts that he gave us a promise. The promise he gave us back then, it was do not. It was from Isaiah. It says, "Do not call to mind the former things, or ponder things of the past. I will do something new. Will you not be aware of it? I will even make a roadway in the wilderness and rivers in the desert."
Mm.
And long story short, there's a lot of details to go into, but the long story short was, God was basically saying, Keith, to us, my wife and I, that I want to lead you into something new. And so we left. We separated from the Navs. We stayed in touch, but we didn't. We came out here to Pittsburgh, and God miraculously found work for me out here. And I had a wonderful career, 30-year career in the field of banking, and when that was done, over with, I transitioned into another field, the information technology, from which, and I was in that for 12 years, and retired from that 4 years ago. But during that course of time, my wife and I got involved. We got involved in a church, and we always pursued pursued people. And we did a lot of small group stuff with people. And the church we were active in had a real heart for discipleship. They actually hired two guys. Both of them went to I think they both went to Dallas Theological Seminary. Walt, and of course the pastor at that church was a Dallas Theological Seminary grad, and they started a small group ministry which was focused on discipleship, and actually they were using Nav materials. So it just fit in real nice for my wife and I to be part of that for a number of years. But then one of the guys that was doing this, he lived north of Pittsburgh in a community that was starting to take off as far as growth and kind of become a suburb in and of itself. And they asked him to try to take some of the people from the church who were already up there living around there and try to start a church. So we actually got involved in a church planning project many years ago, and were involved with that for a few years. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get the church to a what I call critical mass. So we ended up having eventually shut the project down. But what was neat about it was we had an emphasis on reaching the lost, and that's what made it hard for us to get to critical mass, because it's one thing to offer programs and stuff like that'll just attract people from, kind of take people from other churches, so you're stealing the saints, so to speak. We wanted to help our people reach lost, to associate with the lost, and share Christ with them, and we tried to help them how to do that, but that takes time. That's a longer period for that to see that come to fruition. So we weren't able to get there. So anyways, so after that closed down, we just continued to be involved in some churches, do small group stuff, do stuff. We in the early days, we did stuff in our neighborhood, as far as outreach and stuff like that. So that's kind of things we've been up to.
That's great. And then it's exciting because I think that you guys are going to actually get to meet each other face to face, and
we hope to, because
yeah. Hey, I'm offering to buy dinner. I got dinner for you and your wife.
Well, turns out Walt lives real close to where my son and his wife and our two grandsons live. And we get out there quite frequently. So we hope to be able to connect on one of these trips that we get out there and finally have a chance to meet face to face.
I think that'll be amazing.
Yeah, I heard what you said about, hey, I'm just doing what the Lord calls me to do, and it's kind of not that big of a thing. And I get it. I mean, I get it. You're being obedient, and that's what you're supposed to do, and I get it. But again, I mean, for me,
It changed everything.
My specific prayer, said, God, I'll go anywhere. I'll do anything. But you've got to bring someone here to me so I know, so I can put a stake in the ground, and I'll follow you all the days of my life. And but Lord, you have to make it clear, because I'm so confused. I'm such a mess. God, make it clear. Help me put a stake in the ground. And you walking up to that door and knocking on the door, you were the stake in the ground. And just a year ago, my wife and I went to we went to Africa, and Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm on the board of a ministry that works in 6 countries in East Africa. And one of my students from when I was teaching at Moody Grad School, one of my students is just discipling right now 1,600 pastors in 6 countries in East Africa. And
Wow.
And he dreamed of this, and he said, he calls me Prof. He said, Prof, I'm doing what you taught me to do at Moody Grad School, and he said, and that model is changing churches in East Africa. And
Oh.
again, Keith, you have a piece of that. You know, I mean, I
To
will.
me, that's, when you talk about rewards in heaven, I think
We
that's
have
what the rewards
have
are.
no idea. I
It's
mean,
all these people. It's all these people that are going to come up to us, say, thank you, thank you. They're going to
you
be,
know,
Keith, thank you for reaching Walt, because you reached Walt, he was my professor. And because he was my professor, I got this vision. And
yeah,
because of that vision, I was able to, I mean, to me, that isn't that so cool how the kingdom of
Greg,
God
I,
grows.
I I'm convinced we have no clue. There's coming a time, when I think of this little old lady, Esther Eckman, saw me as a mess as a 15-year-old, and she said, "I'm praying for you, and I'm going to pray that the hound of heaven keeps on you until you bow your knee to Christ." I mean, no one even knows this lady's name, but she prayed and prayed and prayed for me. And when I came to faith in Christ, I never knew, but she was my wife's grandmother. And
Wow.
when I grew in Christ, and when she saw that, I mean, she just said, God told me, the Spirit of God told me that I needed to pray for you every single day. And maybe it's Esther Eckman's prayers that brought Keith to my door. I don't know. I don't know how God does all of that, but he does. And we don't have a clue. I mean, someday we will. When we get to heaven, we'll have a clue. Um, but I think we will be amazed. We will be shocked with the way the Lord, what did you say? Orchestrated divine appointments.
Amen.
Yeah. The thing is that, you know, Walt and I are a little ahead of you on the age spectrum, Greg, and so we're a little closer to glory than you are, and you get to the stage of life, and you get to thinking, uh, did I do enough? Did I do all that I should have done?
Yeah,
And this makes you realize that, first of all, we're not gonna know the answer to that question for the most
right.
part until we get to heaven. Um, in this instance, God has chosen to, you know, provide some information a little ahead of time, which it's awesome. But the other thing is that, this is all about God. We're gonna, whatever we needed to do, whatever we were supposed to do, it just all goes back to Him when we get there. It's not,
Yeah.
it's
Amen.
it's just not about us. It says here, it's God who gives the growth. God does His stuff, and He allows us to have a part in it. And it's just, you know, it's mind-boggling, but He does.
Yeah.
Mm. I like the story of, the Apostle Paul, and
Mm-hmm.
remember how God sent Ananias to open his eyes. And Ananias was like a nobody, basically. I mean, he was, he's only in the Bible because he was the guy that God said, "Hey, I want you to uh, go to that guy, the Apostle Paul." And
And he didn't want to do it. He said, "No, Lord, what are you talking about? This
right,
guy's
right,
killing it." No.
right. And then you think about like how God used Ananias in the Apostle Paul's life. And to me, that's what's, I mean, just again, I felt like it was a divine appointment when I met with you, Walt. Um, and that was just a few weeks ago. And the fact that I was able to track down Keith and reintroduce you guys it just brings so much joy to my heart. Um, and it also just encourages me, like, that how the Lord is working, because I went there with an agenda, you know, and to me, this is what God really brought us together
Mm.
for, is for me to help reconnect you guys on this side of eternity. And so Yeah, I hope this encourages believers as they listen to it, and even unbelievers that, hey, if you're like Walt and you're at the end of your rope, just say a prayer and cry out to Jesus. Say, ask God to send somebody to you, and watch Him work. But Walt, we barely scratched the surface on the amazing things that God has done in your life, like the places He's taken you, the opportunities He's given you, the impact that you've had, and to me that is just it just it's hard for me to grasp what you were like before you met Christ. When you started texting me and said, "Hey, Greg, this is what I was like," I was an angry young man. I was not in a good place. Like, I was like, "No way," because
Yeah.
when I met you, Walt, I was like, "Oh, this guy was probably raised in a solid Christian home, and just perfect." Um, it just, and to me, that's the transformation, right?
Well,
That's
I
how the
check in
gospel
with any
changed.
of my high school classmates, and they still laugh like they're like, "Wait a minute, you're a pastor and you're in ministry?" And just recently they were kind of kidding me, and they're like, "Wait, was it at the White House that you went into the prison cell or the Capitol building?" And I mean, I mean, but the point is, again, God can transform a life, you know, but He also normally he could use angels. I wondered if Keith might have been an angel, but He normally uses people to share this unbelievable message that can transform a life. And I am just so thankful that um, is July 13th, 1978, that Keith said, "Okay, God, here I am, send me. I'll go. Here we go. Let's go up and talk to somebody." And like I said, I mean, he doesn't remember it, but man, I remember it because it transformed my life.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Gospel Addict Podcast. Feel free to contact us via email at gospeladdictpodcast@gmail.com.
Stay tuned for our next episode, and remember, on your worst days, you're never beyond the reach of God's grace, and on your best days, you're never beyond the need of God's grace.
See you next time.